Hello folks, this is Professor John Gallaugher, and thank you so much for the privilege of being part of your journey to learn to program using Swift for iOS development. And we'll start with a little bit of inspiration that you can find in the YouTube video that's linked in the reference material in your course book below this video. Drew Houston, who is the guy who developed Dropbox when he was in his 20s, has said that coding is the closest thing that we have to a real superpower. And this is actually a wonderful way to think about programming. It allows you to take your vision, turn it into something creative, hopefully something that makes you happy, something that can help other people. Hopefully you will find that there is a really fun and lucrative career in this for you as well. So let's start helping you acquire this superpower and become a coding hero. Now, when we learn to program and build apps, we're going to be using Xcode. So mine is right in the dock. I'm just going to click on it to launch it. Make sure that you're using at least version 11 of Xcode, and then click on Create a new Xcode project. I'll make Xcode full screen by clicking the green traffic light in the upper left-hand corner. And you'll see along the top there's an option not only to create iOS apps using Xcode, but also watchOS apps, TV OS apps, Mac OS apps. You can even use Xcode to work on some projects beyond Apple's platforms. We're going to select iOS. We're going to click on Single View Application and click Next. Now in the screen that says Product Name, let's go ahead and give our first app a name. Now many code tutorials have you create your first program called Hello World. We are not going to have a Hello World in this tutorial. I think it's awesome that you're learning how to code, so we're going to call our first app You Are Awesome! Exclamation point. Now, I have a few other things that are in here as well. Team probably just says your name at this point. The organization name is probably your name as well. The identifier should remain the same too. Down here under language, there's Objective-C as well. Now, C is just another programming language, and there are variants of it, Objective-C, C++, but this is a decades-old technology. When Apple came up with Swift a few years back, they took all the learning from previous decades of various programming languages, came up with something that was not only easy to use, but a really robust, powerful, scalable programming language. So be sure Swift is selected. It's probably selected by default. This is not just a learning tool. This is a professional development tool. This is the core programming language that Apple has staked its development future on. In fact, they've also open sourced Swift so it can be used beyond Apple's platforms as well. Now, under User Interface, select Storyboard, not Swift UI. Swift UI was something that was introduced in 2019. It's very new. Most employers are not using Swift UI yet, and Apple is still filling out the feature set for this product. So it's really not the best tool to use to get a job as an iOS developer with the largest number of firms today, but it is going to be an important technology in the future. So keep an eye on Swift UI. The first apps that we develop will all use storyboards. It's also okay to leave all of these checkboxes below unchecked. So with your user interface selected as storyboards, then click on Next. Also select Create Git Repository on my Mac. That's going to give us what we need in order to be able to use GitHub. You'll be asked where to save your project. I'm going to save mine right on the desktop. Now, all of this looks super complicated and very geeky. It's going to be fine for us to go ahead and ignore the complexity and then introduce different pieces when we need them. Also remember, your online text has lots of great reference information, and there are exercises to help test your knowledge. Now, Xcode is an IDE, or an integrated development environment, and in the same way that you use Excel to create spreadsheets or Word to create documents, you use an IDE like Xcode to create programs like apps. Now, IDEs not only allow you to edit programs, but they typically have debugging tools. There's also a tool that will simulate an iOS device on your Mac so that you don't need to install it on an iOS device to test your program. And Xcode is definitely the best thing to be using for iOS development. Google has something called Android Studio. Microsoft has Visual Studio. There are lots of other IDEs available for particular development environments, but Xcode is definitely the best choice when you're developing for Apple products. So let's take a tour. If you look up here in the upper left-hand corner, you see, as in most Mac apps, you've got your traffic lights to close the app, to minimize it, or to make it full screen. Let's click the amber circle to minimize Xcode. And the reason why I want to do this is to take a look at the files that were created when we created our project. So our project was called You Are Awesome. You see that there is a folder here called You Are Awesome. If we double click on this, we can actually see inside here that there is yet another folder called You Are Awesome, and there's this file that ends in .xcodeproj. This is the one that you will click on if you want to get into this project right away, open up Xcode, and start your work. I'm going to click this expansion triangle to show you the files that are inside of the You Are Awesome folder that's inside of the You Are Awesome folder. We see a bunch of other files that are in this folder. Now, if I go back into Xcode Project and take a look, inside our project icon, which is this blue icon up here, you see that there's another folder, and there are a bunch of files here that have the same names of things that we saw inside of that secondary You Are Awesome folder. So we see appdelegate.swift, screendelegate.swift, viewcontroller.swift, this thing called info.plist. If we minimize again with the amber traffic light, we can see that they're here. Now, here's something that's really important. Do not rename any of these things, and do not move files around, especially if you have Xcode open. It's unfortunate that Xcode is so fragile, but you can really break your application if you start to rename things outside of Xcode or if you start to move things around while Xcode is open. Now, one thing that's pretty common that you might want to do is to make a copy of what you're working on, maybe to try new techniques out or to go back and experiment with some changes. So to make an additional working copy of the project, I'll close this window, click on the overall You Are Awesome folder and do a Command D. Now what that's done is it's duplicated and create a copy. Now if I double click and open up the You Are Awesome copy folder, the project inside is also called You Are Awesome, but now this is a distinctly separate project inside of this folder. You can make changes to this one and not affect your original. So sometimes when you're going through the exercise and you want to go back and maybe try some things out, make a change, undo some things, and redo them in a copy, you can just use this Command D technique. This works great for making a copy to work with, but if you want to actually rename your project, unfortunately the steps for that are more complicated, but there's information in your textbook reference section below this video. Now I don't need the copy, so I'm going to get rid of that right now, drag You Are Awesome copy into the trash, and I'm going to get back into Xcode by double-clicking on this youareawesome.xcode proj. Now let's continue our tour of Xcode from the upper left-hand corner of this title bar that you see across the top of Xcode. And just to the right of the traffic light icons, you see something that looks like a play button. If you hover your cursor over any of the different icons that you see in Xcode, you'll typically see a tooltip. So this one here says build and then run the current scheme. So when we're ready to deploy on an iOS device, or more commonly when we're ready to run the app in a simulator, we'll click on this play button. Now the stop button is grayed out, but if we want to interrupt something which is currently executing, we can click on the stop button. To the right here, we see this thing that looks like an architect's compass. And just to the right of this, it says on mine, John's iPhone 11 Pro. Yours likely says something different, but if you hold your cursor over the tooltip, it says set the active scheme. Now remember, the play button refers to building and running the current scheme. So what the scheme is it's essentially where do you want to deploy your project? So I have deployed to my own personal iPhone 11 Pro, which is called John's iPhone 11 Pro. But down here, you'll see all of these different simulators, and you can add additional simulators as well. So when Apple introduces new iOS devices, you should expect to see updated versions of Xcode listing the new devices here. Now we'll see the simulator run in just a bit. This middle part of the toolbar here will give us information on the current status of the project. So we're ready to build and run right now. When we do build and run, we'll eventually see a progress bar go across here, and if we have any errors, we'll see some flags show up here as well. We'll check that out in a bit, but if you move all the way to the right-hand side, you see three icons that look kind of similar. These icons let you control what's visible in your Xcode work area. So on the left-hand side, this icon that shows a blue line to the left-hand side, you hover your cursor over it, it says hide or show the Navigator. If you click on it, notice that the pane over on the left-hand side goes away and that line turns gray. Blue means it's showing, gray means it's been hidden. Same thing on the right-hand side if you want to give yourself some more room. This area here is called the Inspectors area. If you click on this, that will hide the area. It will show the area. Now the middle of the three icons here shows a line down below. If you hover your cursor over, it refers to the debug area. It's gray because it's not being shown now, but if you click on it, it will turn blue. It'll expose the debug area. We'll talk more about that in a bit, but we'll hide it right now. We'll show the Navigator area over here on the left. So now that we have the Navigator area open, I want to point out a few things. One is this very top icon that we have here is our project icon. It's blue. It has that Architect's app symbol on it as well. Clicking the blue project icon will bring up settings that are related to the project. We're not going to work with those yet. Most of the things that we're going to work with are inside of this yellow folder that has the same name as our project. Sometimes when you open up Xcode projects downloaded from the internet or things on your computer, you might not see any files here. But again, this is just an expansion triangle. When you click on the expansion triangle, you will expose any files that are below there. So that's where you can get the files for your project. Now, also notice in the Navigator's pane, we have this file folder highlighted in blue. And if you hover your cursor over, you can see the tooltip says Project Navigator. Now, if we click on these other icons, we can bring up other navigators as well. We're going to ignore the complexity in these, but do know if for some reason you've lost your files, it might be because one of these other navigators is showing up. For example, when you have errors in an executing program, errors and other issue warnings will show up in this area here that's highlighted by the yield icon. It's called the Issues Navigator. So if you're ever wondering, hey, where are my files? Just click over here in the Navigator's area on the Project Navigator. That's this little file folder icon. Now, what we're going to pay attention to are two of the files underneath our You Are Awesome folder. One is called main storyboard and one is viewcontroller.swift. So we'll click first on this one that's called main storyboard. And what you'll see here is what's called the interface builder canvas. This allows us to build our user interface. Now what you'll see is the outline of something that looks like an iPhone. And in fact, we can change the dimensions of this device here. Mine happens to say view as iPhone 11. We'll work with that in just a bit. But in this area, this is where we're going to drag over user interface elements and lay out what our iPhone screens are going to look like. You see the phrase view controller up here. You can consider a view controller as being a screen on the iPhone. And initially, all of our apps will have just one screen or view controller, but eventually we'll have multiple view controllers. We'll learn how to navigate between them. We'll also give our view controllers names. Now, the view controller itself and the different items that we're going to lay out here on this canvas are going to be controlled programmatically. And the program file to control this view controller here, the picture that we've drawn, is going to be in this thing called viewcontroller.swift. This file isn't especially friendly, and we're going to ignore it for the rest of this video. Let's go back to the main storyboard and start to lay out our first app. Now, you can move the view controller that you're seeing on screen up or down. You can pinch or zoom to zoom in. There's also a zoom facility down below, so mine says 75%, but you can click on the minus or plus to change the size, and if you click on the number, a menu will pop up and you can choose the size directly. There's plenty of ways to do things in Xcode to accomplish the same task. If you go up under the editor menu, you'll also see that there's zoom here. One of the nice things about using some of the menu options is they also expose some keyboard shortcuts. So if you wanted to zoom into 100%, this upward pointing arrow, some people call that the caret, is really representing the control character. So control, command, and the equal sign pressed simultaneously will zoom into 100%. I'm going to go back to about 75% and position that here. I also want to show you how you can change the view of the interface builder to show the dimensions of different devices on the canvas. So it says iPhone 11 here. If I click on this, we can see lots of different iOS devices appear in this menu. So just clicking on View As will expose or hide this area here. If you decided that you wanted to show something on a very large iPad, you could click all the way to the left, and what we'll see is it'll take a little bit of time, and you don't see it because it's so large, but I'm going to pinch down, and you see a massive iPad canvas that you can use to lay out interface elements on an iPad or see how things render on iPad dimensions. I'm going to go back here, and it looks like I've lost the rest of my device options, but if you simply click on where it says device here, you'll see all of them show up in this pull down menu. I'm going to go back, and I'm actually going to select iPhone SE. And the reason I'm going to select iPhone SE is because this is, at the time I'm making this recording, the smallest device that will run iOS 13. Now there is an iOS 4S here, but the maximum iOS that runs is iOS version 9. You probably don't have a lot of users that are running iOS 9, so we're not going to concentrate on dealing with that extra small user interface. If you're building an app, Apple would actually prefer that you develop a separate version for iPad OS, but do know that it's possible to develop an iPhone app, run it on an iPad. You can scale it up on the iPad, but it'll have the dimensions of what are in this version of Xcode, the iPhone 8. But let's stick with iPhone SE. In a future video, we'll show you how you can resize interface items dynamically for the size of the phone. But working with a smaller device helps us make sure that the entire user interface that we're going to design is going to fit in the dimensions of that device. So let's make sure that we've clicked on iPhone SE for the smallest device that we want to work with. And enough talk, let's go ahead and start laying out our app. I'm going to click on View As iPhone SE just to give myself a little bit more room here. And if you take a look at the cluster of icons in the upper right-hand corner, the one on the left is a plus sign. And if you hover your cursor over there, the tooltip will say Library. Now, the library is context sensitive, but when we are on the main storyboard and we click on the plus, we see a bunch of user interface objects here. You can click and drag to reposition this window, and you can also change the look of the object library window. So if I click on what looks like 4 squares in the upper right-hand corner, this changes the list of elements in the object library to a grid that shows little pictures or icons of those objects. Now I think it's better for us to use the list, so I'm going to click on this to toggle back to list, because not only does it show a picture of the interface element, it also shows a name of the element. Over here on the right-hand side, this will show you a description or hide the description. Now, notice when we see this thing that looks almost like a donut with a square in the middle of it. This means that we're on the object library. That's what you see in the tooltip when you hover over it. If you hover over to the next one, this is the image library. And what we see here initially are a set of images Apple refers to as SF symbols. They're a bunch of icons and other images that you'd want to use in your apps that are standard, and they can also be scaled. So it's a wonderful way to be able to get some consistency in the look and feel of your app. But you can, of course, add your own images, and we'll learn how to do that in a future lesson. But for now, let's click on the circle with the square in it, which will bring us to the object library. And if you scroll down on the objects, we see a bunch of different things that have names that you might be familiar with. We've got labels, buttons, segmented controls, switches, sliders, activity view indicators, and a whole lot more. Well, right now what we want to include on our interface is a label. So I'm just going to click here where it says label, and while holding down the mouse button, I'm going to drag the label over to the view controller. Notice that the object library went away, and notice as I'm dragging over, I get a plus sign which indicates that I can add this interface element to the canvas. I also see that my view controller turns blue, and I see a little dotted line show up that shows, hey, I'm about to drop this label right in the center of the view controller. If I move it toward the top, I can see that there's also an indicator here of a margin on the top. There's also an indicator for the margin on the right-hand side, the left-hand side below. You can position it right in the center that shows perfectly where the vertical and horizontal center is. I'm going to put it at the top margin here, right in the horizontal center, and I'm going to let go. And now we've added a label to our view controller. Nice. Now, unfortunately, it's not a very exciting label, so we're going to make it look fancier. And the way that we can do that is first, make sure that you're showing the inspector's pane. And what you want to do is to click on this downward pointing arrow. Now, if you hover your cursor over that, this will say that it is the attributes inspector. And that will show you the attributes of any object that you've clicked on. Now, I'm currently showing the attributes for the label. It actually says label in the upper left-hand corner of this attributes inspector pane. And we can see that the label is selected because it's got these little white handles. That's what they call these little white selection boxes that are on the outside rectangle of the selected label. Now, if we go over here and take a look inside of the attributes inspector, since we've selected a label, we see attributes that are appropriate for a label. And these things look pretty familiar if you used a word processor before. So we've got some stuff about text alignment, text color, font. So we're showing and we can change any of these attributes for the label. Now, one of the things that we want to do is we want to change the text that's inside because generically it just says the word label. So if I click in here where it says label, I can start to type in something new here. So why don't we type in "you are awesome!" exclamation point and press enter. And when we do that, we see "you are awesome" goes inside of the label. It updates on our user interface canvas. The text shows up as left justified. And that's because under alignment, this thing over on the right-hand side, if you hover your cursor over, will say natural. That just means if it's a left to right language system, it will naturally align the text from left to right. If we were in a language like Arabic or Hebrew that goes right to left, it would be showing right to left. But I want this to show center, so I'm going to move my cursor right over the center alignment button. Looks just like it does in a word processor, and I'm going to click that. Now, even though we don't see a change, everything inside of this label box will now be center justified. So now let's move the label. And if you move your cursor over on top of the label, you can move it when it turns into this Mickey Mouse style white glove. Then click, hold down the mouse button and drag to position it so that it's in the horizontal center of the view controller. Now let go, and now I'm going to change "you are awesome" to "you are great." And instead of clicking over in the text box here, I'm going to double click on the label itself. Notice that I've highlighted all of my text, and I can just start to type in "you are great!" exclamation point, press return, and we see everything is center justified. Now if I want to go back and make a change, I'm going to highlight the word "great" over here, type in "awesome" instead, which the app is called "you are awesome," so we'll press return, and your label says "you are awesome," and you are, because you've just added and customized a label. Good work! Now let's make the box that's holding the label a little bit bigger. I'm going to drag it over here so that the upper left-hand corner is right at the intersection of the left and top margin. And then if you move your cursor right on top of one of these little handles, the cursor changes to a black cross. You can see arrows in the direction where I can resize my rectangle. Hold down the cursor, drag to resize. You see a W and an H for the width and the height of the resizing, and that will change as you drag the anchor around. Also, you are working with the attributes inspector, but if you click on the ruler here, holding your cursor over says that this is called the size inspector. And then down in the size inspector, you can go and you can change your width and height this way. So if I decided I wanted to do 150, I could just type it right in here, 150, press enter, it resizes, or I'm going to do a Command Z to undo and go back to 100. Now, let's go back to the Attributes Inspector. That's this downward pointing arrow here. Click that arrow, enter the Attributes Inspector, find the font attribute, and click the T icon to the right of the font. Now, this font menu shows Apple system fonts, and there are a bunch of choices that Apple gives us. For example, large title, if you select that, will automatically make this very large. But in addition to using the Apple styles, you can also scroll up here and select Custom. Selecting a custom font will give you a font family menu, and you can select any of the fonts which are available. Now, you probably have a lot of fonts here. If you want to jump to a particular font, you can simply type in the first letter for that font or type in a few letters in succession. So if I type in AVEN, I jump to Avenir. Right here, I can change the font to Avenir Condensed. I'm going to go back actually to the Helvetica Nouveau font. So I'll find that right here. and I've got this selected. Now, I can also change my font style. I can do bold, italics. This will change depending on the styles that are available for the font that was selected. So I'm going to go ahead and select bold. And the reason that I get the ellipses or the 3 dots over here is because my text is too big to be showing in the label. So I can change my font size here. If I press the down arrow next to size, we can see that the size is changing. Or I can go right in here to where it says, and highlight the number and change it from 30 to 24. Press enter. We've got bold, you are awesome right here. Now I'll click the done button and point out a few more things. Now just to the right of the project Navigator, I have another pane here. This is called the document outline. And if you look just below your interface builder canvas, you'll see another one of these toggle boxes to show or hide a pane. And if you click it, you can hide the document outline or show the document outline. Just as a side note, you might have caught this. There's an interface inconsistency. Unlike the other icons that show or hide panes, the document outline doesn't turn blue when it's currently showing. And as you develop more apps, you'll get a keener eye for user interface differences. But we're showing the document outline now, and this is the hierarchy of all of the objects that are on our view controller. And when my label is selected, we can see that the label is showing right here. This L icon means label, and the text next to it, you are awesome, is just the text in the label. By the way, this is also just an expansion triangle, so if you're not seeing the items, you can just expose them. If I click in the gray area outside of the view controller, watch what happens to my attributes inspector. There are no attributes for something that's not selected. Click back on the label, we see that it shows up in the document outline, and it shows all of the attributes for the label. Now there's also this thing called a view. That's the area that encompasses everything inside the view controller. Click anywhere outside of the label but inside the view controller. The handles go away to show that the label isn't selected anymore. In the document outline, we can see view is highlighted. And over in the attributes inspector, we see that it doesn't say label anymore. It says view because that's what we've selected. This shows all the attributes that apply only to a view. So everything is context sensitive. You see the attributes inspector changing depending on what's selected. Right now, let's select label and let's change its colors. Text color is just an attribute. So if we go over here and click on color, we see a menu pop up here. Here's my default color. You see a bunch of different named Apple colors too. So that if I wanted to use system red, I just select that. You also have up top a bunch of recently used colors. And down here under custom, this will pull up the standard Macintosh color picker. On the left-hand side, you can select the color wheel. It shows the currently selected color. You can click and select other ones. There are the sliders, which will allow you not only to slide the different RGB colors, but you can enter the decimal value or the hexadecimal colors. There are also various color palettes that have names associated with them. And the one that I like to use the most are the colored pencils. This looks like a big crayon box. If you move your cursor over, it's kind of nice if you're colorblind. You can see the names of the colors showing up top. I'm going to select grape. We should see the colors change, but this is likely a bug in my version of Xcode. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close the color palette. I'm going to click back on my label again, go back over here down to custom, click on grape. Sometimes you've got to redo some things here, but we've got grape as our color. Nice. Now let's use one more technique. Sometimes you'll want a color that isn't available in Apple's color palettes. You might not know the RGB value for it, but you can use the Eyedropper tool for that. And in this example, I'm going to select my university colors. Now if I head over and take a look at the webpage for the Schiller Institute, I want to make clear Phil Schiller is not endorsing the learning program we're using here, but he is a university trustee, a very proud Boston College alumnus. You'll see Phil on stage for every major Apple product announcement. He's been very generous to the university and to students in my courses. We've been out for a number of Apple product launches, including the launch of the original iPhone. But the main reason I'm on this webpage is because it's got the official Boston College maroon. So what I'm going to do is, back in Xcode, now that I've got this showing in another window, I'm just going to slide this out with my webpage behind it. I'm going to click on the Eyedropper tool. I'm going to go over until I've highlighted Boston College maroon. Click here, and we can see that I've changed You Are Awesome to Boston College maroon. Nice. Now I'm going to get rid of the color palette that I've got here. And now I'm going to show you how we can use the complementary color of Boston College Gold as the background color for the app or the color of the view. I'll position Xcode over this part of the web page. The word Boston College is in Boston College Gold. So again, we're context sensitive. Right now we're taking a look at the label, but if I click either on the view on my canvas itself, or if I click on the word view here and the icon associated with it in my document outline, all of a sudden I can see all the attributes available for view. One of these attributes is background color. If I click on background color, show custom, go down here to Eyedropper, move my Eyedropper selection magnifier right on top of Boston College Gold and the word Boston, click on this, and all of a sudden I've got Boston College's official maroon and gold colors in my app. I'm going to keep the maroon, but I don't want the background color to be in gold, so I'm going to Command Z to get rid of that. I'll double click the toolbar to expand Xcode to take up the whole window. I'll close the color picker, and we're looking good. Why don't we build and run? The way that we do this is, first, let's go ahead and select, for now, the same kind of iPhone in our scheme as we've used to build things on. So since I've been using iPhone SE to lay out my app, I'm going to go up to the Scheme menu and select iPhone SE here. By the way, if for some reason iPhone SE isn't showing up, you could go to Add Additional Simulators here, and then click this plus button in the lower left corner. And you should be able to find different device types and just click on Create and add a simulator with that device type in here. Just give it a name. That's what I had to do actually to get iPhone SE to show up. But now that I've selected iPhone SE from my pull-down menu here, I'm going to go ahead and click on the play button to build and run. It may take a while to build and run the first time you use the simulator, but you'll see this progress bar go across at the top. You'll get a message that says Build Succeed. It'll tell you it's launching your app. Again, you got to be patient the first time you do this, but it says attaching to the iPhone, and woo, we see our app here. It's taking a second to show up. Come on. And we see it says you are awesome. So again, things are slow the first time. One of the reasons why it's a good idea to build and run on an iPhone SE is the simulator actually uses up processing power. So if you try to simulate a large iPhone or an iPad, it's going to be slower. If your iPhone doesn't look the same as mine, we've got a bunch of different options under Simulator. Notice we're not in Xcode now. Simulator is a separate app that's part of the Xcode suite. We can go under Windows here and we can say Show or Hide Bevels. That will toggle on or off these borders that make the simulator look like an actual iPhone. I'm going to put bevels on. We also have a home button here. If this were another kind of iPhone that didn't have the home button, you could just click and drag up to simulate a swipe gesture. Explore some of these other options. For example, under the hardware menu, if you were wondering, hey, what would my app look like if I turn my phone on the side? Well, you can change with rotate left or rotate right here. We see things aren't centered, but we'll learn how to do that in a future lecture. I'm going to go back and I'm going to rotate right to go back to where we were again. You can see a bunch of different things that we'll learn about under the hardware area here too. There's another way that you can simulate a press of the home button. You can simulate a shake gesture as well, so you don't have to shake your laptop. We'll learn about many of these things in the future, but give yourself a boom shakalaka because you just created your first app. Congratulations. You are awesome. Keep at it, app developer.